For the last topic of this morning, Dr. James Stoxen is going to share us the knowledge about anti-aging sport medicine. About Dr. James Stoxen, Dr. James owns and operates Team Doctors Chiropractic Treatment and Training Center. Team Doctors is one of the first care centers in the world to combine chiropractic care, therapy, active rehabilitation, and strength training for world-class athletes. In a private rehab training center for competitions, Dr. Stoxen also provides on-site chiropractic care and anti-aging consultation and care to numerous top celebrities all over the world. Dr. Stoxen also has an extensive background in sport medicine. In 2008, he was introduced into prestigious National Fitness Hall of Fame. In 2012, he was also inducted into the Personal Trainer Hall of Fame. Also, he was appointed to serve on the prestigious Global Advisory Board of the International Sport Hall of Fame, as well as being appointed to the Advisory Board of the American Board of Anti-Aging Health Practitioners. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Dr. James Stoxen.
Good morning. I'd like to thank Dr. Nieda.
Yes.
And Dr. Patana as a keynote speaker. I've been lecturing here in Thailand for approximately 10 years now, on and off, and it's always the biggest crowd in Asia. It's the #1 anti-aging medical conference in all of Asia. As you can see, some of the best speakers in the world are here today, so I'm very honored to be here. First of all, I'd like to talk about sports medicine and anti-aging medicine. Dr. Goldman, who started the Academy of Anti-Aging Medicine, actually started the National Academy of Sports Medicine, which has approximately 80,000 worldwide. And then he spun off the Academy of Anti-Aging Medicine, seeing the need for those athletes and those individuals who are moving into the baby boomer population to actually extend their abilities to perform at maximum capacity and maximum efficiency with accelerated aging of the body and the systems. So it was through our involvement in Muscle and Fitness magazine as advisory board, and also one late night telephone call from Dr. Goldman requesting my services, that I actually became acquainted with the Academy of Anti-Aging Medicine. My first lecture was in 2004. It was a very large audience, which this one will be as big as that one. Approximately 4,500 in a room the size of a football field. It was very daunting, but yet it was very exciting nonetheless. Since then, it's been a very exciting journey for me, and I'm very happy to be here. I would like to share the most advanced information about sports medicine, biomechanics, and the relationship to human performance, recycling of energy, absorbing all these impacts, and maybe I'm going to clarify for you some of the mysteries and some of the conceptions that are producing some painful misunderstandings of human mechanics. And so we're going to go over that today. Obviously, this is a picture of Usain Bolt. He's an inspiration to us all. He's a human spring, a very stiff and efficient, speed, fast, quick human spring. And he recently won the world record, won the world championship in Beijing recently. And obviously, there's a big difference between Usain Bolt and how do we make that connection between how we train athletes and how we maximize human performance. And on the other side of the spectrum, degenerative joint disease, inability to walk, accelerated aging. We can learn a lot from sports medicine. In fact, sports medicine actually been ahead of, or sports have actually been ahead of medicine. In fact, sports have taught us, athletes and trainers have taught us, doctors, a lot of valuable lessons and actually embarrassed us many times over the decades. In fact, Joe Weider was proposing that bodybuilding, and him and Arnold Schwarzenegger were promoting bodybuilding and weight training as a form of exercise to decelerate aging. And us as doctors said it would enlarge our heart and make us bulky and create aging, and it's not good for the body. For 10 to 15 years, doctors like myself, Dr. Goldman, Joe Weider, Arnold Schwarzeneggers, and the old-timers now, promoted bodybuilding and exercise as a form of anti-aging and improving health. And then eventually, slowly but surely, the medical community came around to the fact that this is actually a good thing. So no, not everybody has been along for the ride. In fact, it took about 2 decades to actually convince the medical community that exercise was healthy for the body, lifting weights. So here we have degenerative joint disease. Now, I find it amazing when a patient comes to me and they have a 1 millimeter left in their hip joint, and they say, well, can you save me from this hip surgery? I said, why is that? Because my surgeon is recommending eventual surgery, and I don't want that. And I said, well, what are they saying? He said, well, your hip on the right has 1 millimeter left, and the one on the left is fine. And when you asked them what was the cause, they said, well, it's just aging. It's just you're getting old. Well, then how come the one on the left is thicker joint cartilage than the one on the left or the right? Because they're both the same age. And then the light bulb goes on in the head of the patient, and they said, you know what, you're right. So, obviously they're looking back at what the doctor said, and they said, well, something's wrong with his theories, because that doesn't make any sense. And if you're going to say that to your patient, and they've seen this lecture online, well, then you're obviously going to be embarrassed. So it's about time we learn something new here that's a better explanation for why we actually have these degenerative changes in accelerated aging. The current standard of care is actually behind the times. In my area of medicine, what we have here is we have a situation where doctors have determined that there's the inability for the patient to support their body weight by the arch of the foot, so they prescribe a brace to put under the arch to shore up the body. So what we're doing is we're actually starting the whole process of aging very quickly instead of regressing the aging process, which would be going the opposite direction. What do I mean by that? I'm saying something like, progressive aging starts with shoring up the arch of the foot, and then we need another brace. We call it a cane. And then we move to a 4-prong walker, and then we move to a wheelchair, and then we're actually bedridden. So all along the way in our life, we are constantly supporting the body and thinking that it's not capable of supporting itself until it can't support itself, and then we're bedridden. If you ask people who are bedridden, how did you feel when you were 40 years old? Chances are they're actually more active than you are. And so if you think that you're going to escape being bedridden at their age, then you are mistaken. So it's about time that we start to learn different ways to regress aging, actually go backwards, and then we can learn something new from our athlete friends. Now here's a sample of how the medical world just seems to be confused by this miracle of sport. This athlete right here won 2 gold medals and broke all the world records in 1960 and 1964. He was the only athlete in the world to win the marathon gold medal 2 Olympic Games in a row, and actually the only one that won it twice. And what's interesting about this is that this Abebe was actually from Ethiopia, and he was offered footwear to wear by the shoe companies to run in the race, but they didn't fit well, and they hurt his feet, so he tossed them aside and ran the entire course barefooted. And what's even more remarkable is that was in Rome on the cobblestones. And he beat the other athletes and won the gold medal, and then he subsequently trained barefoot for all the rest of the Olympics. And just before 1964 Olympic Games, he had appendicitis 6 weeks prior to the race. He recovered from it and actually won the race, again running, and was doing calisthenics, waiting for the other athletes to come in. So there's some misconceptions on human mechanics that I'm about to clear up for you. First of all, human mechanics starts with two key elements. How is the body engineered, and how is it modulated or controlled? This is an example of an athlete by the name of Beamon. If I can get this to work, I will get it to work. Here we go. This is one of the most remarkable feats of sport that we've ever seen in the history of mankind. Probably one of the most amazing feats of sport in the last 100 years. Here he breaks the world record, which stood for another 20 years, which was the long jump. And as he takes off, everybody watches the run, and they watch the takeoff and the jump. Incredible feat of athleticism and spring mechanics. And what I'm looking at is the way he walks when he's walking away from the podium. Now look at the body. Look how he doesn't even touch the ground. His heels don't even touch the ground. Look at how he's on his forefoot, and look at the incredible spring of the body. This is another athlete which you might recognize on the right. That's Dr. Stoxen. In his infinite craziness, running barefooted on the concrete street with another athlete by the name of Christian Medina, who had bilateral knee pain, and I told him, when I'm done with you, you're going to run barefoot on the street with me. He looked at me like I was crazy, and I said, you are a Taekwondo national champion, right? You do Taekwondo barefooted. You don't wear shoes when you kick and do those fancy moves, do you? And he said, no, absolutely not. I said, well, you're going to be running barefoot with me. So now you're looking at when babies who are born, they can run barefoot, subsequently do, until you think it's a bad idea and put shoes on their body, on their feet, and then you actually just start to deform their perfect mechanical structures by putting shoes on them and tell them not to do this and that, inhibit their movement, when actually they should be doing free play in the backyard with no shoes on. When I talked to the Shriners Hospital Committee, or the Shriners Hospital for Crippled Children chairman, he said that children should be running barefoot as much as possible in the backyard in free play, because it moves the body in all different directions, stimulating the development of the natural mechanism of the foot. There are three different models of human mechanics that try to explain or study human movement. The first one was developed by a scientist by the name of Borelli in 1685. That was 340 years ago. It's called the inverted pendulum model. Now, the inverted pendulum model says that we throw a straight leg out, straight leg, and then we use the back leg as a push model to push the mass over the straight leg. So essentially, we put our leg out straight, and then we use the back leg to essentially, like a pole vaulting system, we vault our body mass over that straight leg. Then there's the spring mass model. The spring mass model was developed by Harvard scientists in 1989. The research came out in 1990. And then my model, called the integrated spring mass model, which is more advanced than the Harvard model. Now, these three models we're going to go over very briefly, but we're going to cover them in depth as quickly as possible. As you see, this first model came back as a rocker-based inverted pendulum model, saying that we use levers or lever series to move the body forward. Essentially, we push the body forward. And that's for walking. Now, they couldn't really explain very well running, so they said it was, well, with more compliant limbs, which means that it gives a little. So I don't know if that he really understood it totally. He seemed a bit confused in his research, the way he presented the model. Yet, they gave him we have this Borelli Award, which is the award that's given to the top biomechanics scientist in the world every year. So his input was very important, yet we need to look at it in more detail to see if it actually is true. The second model, called the spring mass model, Harvard University scientists came up with a new model that they felt explained human movement, walking, and running better. It says that a planar spring model is a simple mathematical model, so they can use it for doing calculations of bouncing gaits such as running, trotting, and hopping. The spring mass model says that we have linear springs, they are legs, and that they have some degree of compression, and the whole leg is a linear spring. If that was so simple, we would look like giant slinkies. obviously the legs are not linear springs. They're variable resistance springs. We have knee joints, we have long limbs, and so it's not as simple as the spring mass model has portrayed it to be. So a spring is a lever is a simple machine with a bar that pivots on a fixed support or a fulcrum. It's used as like a transmit torque by pushing down on one end and pushing at the other. You might think that the ankle, the Achilles tendon, pushes the foot forward, and that is our lever series model. And it seems logical, doesn't it, that we push our body forward? However, you're going to find out it is not. A classic spring is one that deforms its physical shape, and then it stores energy within that deformation process, and then it eventually reforms back to its original shape, releasing the energy. So if this is the shape of the human foot, with every impact, I'm deforming its shape, storing energy within the deformation process and releasing the energy back to its original shape. Exact original shape is very important, and we'll discuss that later. So this is the difference between the inverted pendulum model and the spring mass model. If you put a sensor on the hip and you look at with a videotape from the side, you should be able to see that the hip actually raises up and drops, raises up and drops the sensor, but in fact it doesn't. So for some reason, that model doesn't seem to be accurate. In this spring mass model, it actually descends, loading energy like a spring. So we could say that's more accurate. Now, the spring mass model has its flaws. As I mentioned, it does not seem accurate because the legs are not linear springs; they're variable resistance springs. Second of all, it only models the hip and the knee and the ankle. So what about the human foot? The human foot has 33 individual joints. When you impact the ground, it spreads the force of that impact across these 33 joints, making the impact less severe over time. When we impact the ground with these collisions called walking, we actually engage this human foot to deform its physical shape. It stores energy during the deformation process. It releases back to its original shape, exact original shape, and that would be the definition of a spring. So the foot is actually a spring too, but it's not modeled in the spring mass model. So the inverted pendulum versus the spring mass model, obviously we can see after 325 years of research that the spring mass model seems to be more advanced, yet we run into these issues also with this interesting scientist, sports scientist, one of the most famous, Yuri Verkhoshansky. Now, when I was 25 years old, I actually became a doctor when I was 24. And the greatest athlete in the world, powerlifter in the world, Ed Cohen, walked in my office the first day I got into practice. Is there a God? I wanted to do sports medicine. The very first day I walk into practice, the greatest weightlifter of all times walks in my office. And then I actually became so well connected with him and helped him so many times to break world records in weightlifting that they actually asked me to come to work as a doctor behind the stage with other athletes, and then they invited me to come to the former Soviet Union in 1987 as a doctor for the United States team. And then at that time I was researching why the Russians were destroying us in weightlifting sports. So I connected with a scientist by the name of Yuri, by the name of Michael Yesis, and Michael was translating the Soviet sports technique journals into English and distributing them to scientists across the United States and Europe. It was called the Soviet Sports Review. I ordered all the reviews from 1966 to 1986 and kept seeing the same name repeated over and over again, Yuri Verkhoshansky. He was the doctor, scientist who developed the shock method of training called Plyometrics, eventually was named, and that was brought to the United States in 1971 by an athlete named Fred Wilt. If you read any journal or any book on sports training, the word plyometrics is a form of training that is different from lever-based training or resistance training because it involves impacts, jumping, box jumping, plyometric jumping drills, etc., depth jumps. And this is a picture I took at the National Institute of Physical Culture and Sports Sciences in Moscow in 1989. I directed the first sports medicine course in the former Soviet Union at the National Institute, and he was one of the lead lecturers. Here we're going over periodization. Now, there's some problems with what science of medicine says and what Dr. Verkhoshansky and the whole sports world states as what is logical in training. And that is the doctors say we should protect the feet with these elaborate, sophisticated packaging called footwear, and don't take up so many impacts are bad for us, and we should do elliptical training. It's better for our joints. But on the other side, athletes and coaches like Verkhoshansky, you're going to talk to if you're in sports medicine, say plyometrics is the answer to developing maximum ability to absorb impacts, elasticity, and human performance efficiency, etc., etc. So who's right? This is some of the first videos that I took at Verkhoshansky's Center of Plyometric Drills. As you can see, there's a lot of hopping, jumping, skipping, bounding. It doesn't look very technical like our gyms, but yet it's very, they're actually accomplishing more. So what I developed was called the integrated spring mass model. And that says that vibrations or impacts are monitored through this integrated spring that incorporates the foot as a spring suspension system. If you look at the foot, what you're going to find is that the foot is actually an arch mechanism that is suspended from above by springy tendons called the tibialis posterior, tibialis anterior, peroneus longus, and peroneus brevis. When I was in college, I took abnormal psychology at Arizona State University and passed it, thank God, which allowed me to have some time off to apply for a job as the TA, as anatomy instructor in human cadaver dissection. What was interesting to me is that the doctors were so interested in the Achilles tendon, didn't find the tibialis posterior and the supportive suspension system muscles to be very interesting. Passed them over, know the origin insertion, and they were too complicated for the exam, so let's get it down now, but we don't have to worry about disregard it, just learn about the spine. Unfortunately, they made huge mistakes by disregarding those muscles. The integrated spring mass model states that the body actually protects itself from impacts by the spring. You see, the lever system model says that you push the body across the ground. The spring mass model says that you spring the body off the ground. So it models the human foot as a spring suspension system, and as you can see from this video here, when you look at when this impact hits the ground, this is a video we took, and you can see on the side of the foot where the tendon actually sticks out from the skin. That's the tibialis posterior. It's the most important tendon to actually spring back the impact of walking and running. So obviously it's very important to develop that tendon so that we can make sure that we are able to spring back the forces of the impact. Now, when we use the spring mass model, what happens is that we can actually employ some of these laws of physics that scientists use that doctors don't. It's interesting to me that the human body is an object that interacts with the earth because because it's on earth, it actually has to abide by the laws of physics. And therefore, the laws of physics will apply to the human body, so we might want to use those laws of physics to try to understand how we absorb impacts. Hooke's law of physics states that the amount of deformity or depression of the spring can be increased, or as it increases, will give back more energy depending upon the stiffness of the spring. And you say, what do you mean by stiffness? I mean, like a stiff is a tight spring, or a compliant is a more loose spring, like a spring in a pen. So we have maximum depth loading by having a more compliant spring, but a stronger spring can actually spring off more weight. So the potential energy of springs are dependent upon the stiffness. Now, on the right, we have a more compliant spring. If we use the same amount of mass, the spring on the right is more compliant. The spring on the left is more stiff. It doesn't depress as easily with the mass. Now, what we found out, the Japanese researchers found out that they put a diagnostic ultrasound on the calf area, and they had people go through walking and running and such. And they found out that when we walk, when we transmit the mass across the foot and the leg, that the muscles of the calf actually came to a, how would you say, near isometric length, which means they didn't change, they contracted and stayed the same length almost throughout the entire passing of the weight across the limb. Well, how is that possible if the foot is a lever and we push the body forward? See, that doesn't make any sense. If the muscle stays the same length throughout the entire transmitting of the weight across the body, then where is the actual energy coming from? It's coming from the stretching of the tendons. So essentially what the human body does when we walk or run, it's a giant pogo stick. It's really not a lever system. And when you think about it, if you just jump from foot to foot, pretty soon, and stop, jump, stop, jump, stop, jump, you might get across the room, but then you're going to be exhausted. But if you run, you can run 26 miles, which is 26,000 of those impacts, and still you can make it without being exhausted. So how is that possible? That's because when we jump and stop, we're using the body, pushing it across as a lever each time we jump. But when we run, where we load the energy in the spring and load it out, it's actually used as a spring mechanism. So that's how we can better understand the misunderstandings of human mechanics also. It has an interplay with chronic fatigue and chronic pain patterns. Isn't it interesting that doctors see patients when they are already broken down? So if we are a giant spring mechanism, what if the spring mechanism breaks down and drops and locks into a lever system? If all we see in the office are patients that are lever systems, then we think the lever system is normal. So what we have a treatment, actually, we can get the lever system to maximum medical improvement. Well, what good is that going to do when we are a spring? In other words, if you don't look at the body as a giant spring mechanism and understand how it works, you can never restore the body to maximum medical improvement. So, this is how we maintain our body through life without damage. This is called elastic deformity. Like I said before, elastic deformity is where it deforms its physical shape, stores energy within the deformation process, and releases the energy and returns back to its exact original shape. That's an actual physics definition. Plastic deformity is when it changes its physical shape but does not reform back to its original shape. It deforms only slightly, or it can deform instantly like a herniated disc. Degenerative disc disease would be slow degenerative process, and bunion would be a plastic deformity. Degeneration of the hip socket would be a plastic deformity. We take about 10,000 steps per day, multiplied by 365 days a year. That's 3.6 million collisions we have with the Earth in 1 year. That's 3.6 million collisions that we have with the Earth per year. That's 100 plus million collisions we have with the Earth by our 30th birthday. In your lifetime, you have 270 million collisions with the Earth. Do you think that's a good idea if we were an engineer to develop the body as a giant lever system? Levers can't absorb impacts. Levers can't recycle energy. And not only that, but levers can't open up spaces and tunnels for nerves to pass safely. those are called discs. Discs are compression springs. The spine and the entire body is a giant torsion spring. Look at the spine and the whole body as a towel that you twist like this, and then when you let go, it snaps back to its original shape, releasing energy. If I put my foot forward and one back, as I just let go of my body and let the natural spring energy release, I just find that my body swings forward and creates the next step automatically for me. When we tell athletes to run, we tell them relax as much as possible. Do you know why? It's because muscle contraction actually gets in the way of speed. When we look at speed from the sense of its elasticity, we see that elastic energy is much stronger than what I can develop with my hand with muscles. So by using muscles, we can actually hit, but more like a lever, but if we use spring, we can actually have more efficient movement and much quicker movement. So plastic deformity and elastic deformity breaks down when we have what we call yield strength, and then ultimate strength and failure strength is when it snaps. It reaches a limit and snaps. That would be a herniated disc or a damage to the cartilage. Compressive forces cause damage to the human body. These compressive forces are caused by abnormal movement patterns with internal compressive force. If we relax the body, we have less internal compressive force. Sherrington did some research in 1906 on whether posture was actually reflexive or it was a learned behavior. And what he found was that by cutting the connection between the midbrain and the cerebral cortex and checking posture, he said that posture was maintained even though the connection was cut. That means that posture is actually developed by reflexes. If I lean my body to the right, why does my head stay perpendicular to the earth? If I lean my body to the left, why does it stay perpendicular to the earth? If I lean back, why does my head maintain its perpendicular position with the earth? It's because the semicircular canals in your skull are like hula hoops, 3 of them, 6 of them if you include both sides. They have 30,000 hairs inside them, and there's a gelatinous material that swishes inside those semicircular canals. And inside there is hairs. They have connection with nerves, and they tell the brain exactly where your body is in space and the acceleration of the body as we are moving. So it gives the brain and the nervous system the exact position of the head. So what it can do is make split-second changes in muscle contractions of the body to actually right the head to perpendicular position in relationship to gravity. So if you're walking and you actually lay your foot down here and have to bring your body around to perpendicular to make the next step, that's all done through reflexes automatically for you. So, what happened here? So what happens is that you can actually sabotage the human spring by having abnormal you can actually sabotage the human spring. What did I do? You can actually sabotage the human spring by activities of daily living, sitting at the desk, or when you are walking, by actually landing in positions that are outside of perpendicular to Earth. As soon as you start walking in positions outside of perpendicular to Earth, what happens is these sensory systems pick up on the position, relay that message to the brain, and the brain decides whether it likes that position based upon the amount of strain that is felt by the strain receptors of the body called spindle cells and Golgi tendon reflex organs. This is what we call spring stiffness. Now, what you're seeing here is more of a sports-oriented, but I'm bringing it to the medical model. This is called spring stiffness. Spring stiffness is when the body springs off the ground with like a super ball. It has a tight spring. Spring compliance is when the body actually drops down lower to absorb the impacts better. So when you're looking at the difference between spring compliance and spring stiffness, one provides more protection from the impacts and the other one gives you more efficiency. Athletes and coaches are looking for something in between that provides the maximum protection from impacts yet the most efficient movement to break the world record. So spring stiffness, there's actually torsional stiffness, leg stiffness, vertical stiffness, and actually cells have stiffness. The body has a stiffness, the tendons have stiffness, and cells have stiffness and elasticity. When you're speaking of cellular elasticity or stiffness, you're speaking of the face and how it sags over time and aging. Pathological spring stiffness is different. You say, what do you mean stiffness? Does that mean I'm stiff? Oh, it means tightness or springiness. Pathological spring stiffness is when we have over control of the tension of the human frame, this human spring. So what happens is that the brain actually takes control of the level of tension of your spring and ratchets down the spring mechanism to prevent the ability of you to absorb impacts. Now this can affect you in running because when you run, it's 3 times your body weight force of impact. So if you weigh 200 pounds, you're hitting the ground at 600 pounds of impact force. As the brain decides that it doesn't, like, let's say if I'm walking and I have to keep my second toe pointing towards the target when I walk, and also the second thing is that when I walk, I want to launch my body on top of the pogo stick. They say heel to toe. Well, there's no spring in the heel. Just look at the anatomy. When you talk about running barefoot, I mean, if you want to check it out to see if heel-toe works, then run barefoot, and then you'll be in the hospital for a week or two with a fracture of your heel. Barefoot runners do not run heel-toe. They run on the forefoot. You know, you can get away with heel-toe running when you have a shoe on because it allows you to get away with bad performance, bad technique. So I decided to run barefoot because I wanted to see if I had good technique. Pathological stiffness sets the tension of the spring to one level, and then it maintains that level. So you can, let's say if I'm running barefoot on the grass and I decide, let's run barefoot on the concrete, what happens is that you will get stressed out. I won't. I've done it before. So I will use my mind to relax my body for maximum impact compliance, but yet some good stiffness. I want to run faster. You may tighten up, get tense, really nervous. Oh, I'm running on concrete. And then by tightening up, you ratchet down the spring. There's no room for the absorption of the impact. And then you take the impact into your joints and you have a fracture of the second toe. And you say that barefoot running is bad for you. I talked to my doctor. He said it's bad. You put some rubber shoes on to protect you. So what happens is that the level of stiffness cannot be altered at that point because it's the dominant reflex. It has taken control of your body. It's compressed it. So let's say it happened when you're 20 years old and you have these abnormal movement patterns that keep perpetuating the stiffness on the spring. Keeps stimulating these receptor sites to ratchet down the tension on the spring as it's called a protective reflex. That is the best explanation that we have right now for degenerative joint disease and degeneration of the structures. Abnormal movement patterns, mental stress, form and technique breaks, and coactivation it's called. Coactivation is when you see somebody walking, you do a GAIT study, and when they put their foot forward, their toes are off the ground, and when the whole body weight is on the foot, their toes are still not touching the ground. I found it hard to believe that they can keep their toes off the ground. But you see it. What happens is that when you lift the weight with the bicep, the tricep is automatically inhibited. It's called reciprocal inhibition. Because you can't contract them at the same time. They just sit there and don't do anything. You know, it just sits there like a stiff. If you do that with the leg, it becomes like a giant pirate's peg. It doesn't bounce, no spring. And you take the impacts into this loaded mechanism that just bangs and twists with every movement. The nervous system is what overmodulates the spring, locks it in. And these sensors that determine whether or not it should be overmodulated are called
spindle cells, and Golgi reflex organs. These cells have filaments in them, 10 to 12 filaments, and there's a nerve wrapped around them. And they're interwoven between the muscles. Each muscle has a certain number of filaments or certain number of cells. The calf muscle has 500 some odd spindle cells. Baby's calf muscle has 500 spindle cells. You have 500 spindle cells. Everyone has them because there's a certain amount. Overmodulation occurs when there's a dysfunction in the movement pattern. Number one, abnormal movement patterns that strain these receptors that send a message to the brain that there's abnormal strain. They're like strain sensors for the brain. And then they create this control over the brain. And here you have a picture of what happens. Inflammation invests the area and stimulates the nociceptors, and nociceptors then creates a secondary neuromotor reflex to the brain that actually creates this abnormal stiffness. So how can we fix this? Let's say we analyze a person's gait and we see that the foot overrolls into an unsafe position. What we can do is we can put a shoe on the foot that has a solid counter support to keep the foot within the safe range. The way to figure this out is by doing a GAIT study. Back in my day, it cost you $25,000 to $50,000 to set up a videotape analysis to do GAIT study. You can get an inexpensive handheld high-definition camera for $300 and hook it up to your Mac and do GAIT studies in your office. This is your GAIT analysis, and you can just do it on the, and you just check to see if the foot's in the safe. And then we actually go into the treatment, which is to release the actual spring mechanism. You can use acupuncture, you can use hands-on. Now here's a quick adjustment. My time is running thin, so I'm going to just show you kind of a fun little adjustment here. This is of the foot. This is of the ankle. Listen. You hear that? Okay, don't be alarmed. It didn't hurt me a bit. So that was now obviously if the ankle released, then it was locked, right? So if it's locked, then how can it resist impacts? How can it load energy? So what happens is that the spring actually locks up by this pathological reflex. It turns into a lever, and then it bangs and twists for 100 million impacts. And you wonder where degenerative joint comes in. Strengthening the spring involves strengthening of these muscles from the sides. We all walk in straight patterns. We need to walk in different patterns. Remove the footwear, strengthen the foot in different angles. That's where the muscles come from the side. Retraining walking means do not heel land. Have a neutral landing or an accelerated landing. Throw the weight on top of the pogo stick. Throw the weight on top of the pogo stick. Put a spring in your step. Allow the body to spring instead of banging and twisting. So I'm going to just give, I'm only going to go over about 2 minutes, but this is a beautiful video of a lady that I love watching her run. Here she's throwing the weight on top of her forefoot when she's spring landing, not heel landing at all. And we can improve spring stiffness by doing plyometrics, which are these drills. Now here's an example of some running drills. I'm going to just go a couple more minutes. This is where you lean forward so that you're going into a controlled fall state, and then you run in zigzag patterns to stimulate the development of the tibialis posterior and the peroneal muscles that actually suspend the foot from above. So these are the running drills that are done by all athletes. I gave these drills at the World Congress of Sports and Exercise Science in Malaysia, and all the doctors wanted copies of them. They're all online. These are double leg drills here that you can have your patients do. They're done barefoot. This is Andrei Arlovsky, the UFC World Heavyweight Champion, who's actually going to be fighting for a world title very soon. He's my client for 10 years. And then single leg drills, which are more difficult because you're putting the full body weight on one leg. And it means that it's double the weight. Instead of putting the weight on two legs, you have it on one. It's much more difficult, as you can see, and exhausting. And this is the end of my presentation is just a kind of a video here of an amazing feat of athleticism.
The bolt is loaded. The World 100-meter final.
Set.
They get away first time. Tyson Gay right alongside Usain Bolt, but here he goes, streaking away already. It's Bolt all the way. He's looking round at Gay. Watch the clock. It's goal for Bolt. And again, he's done it again. A new world record.
Okay, what we found out by analyzing his running was we found out that the second place and the third place athletes actually had more spring stiffness than Usain Bolt. Usain Bolt was just taller, had longer stride length, and that's why he won the world record. The second and third place athletes were better trained. So Usain Bolt actually can run faster than he is right now. So we'll see what he can do. With that, I want to thank you all for inviting me, and I hope you enjoyed my lecture. Please feel free to connect with me on any forum, Facebook, or whichever one you want to ask any questions. Thank you very much for inviting me.